Good old Gene Simmons has people mad again. So, the bass player from Kiss, some people call him a frontman just because he's like probably the most well-known person in Kiss, even though it's frontman's Paul Stanley. Anyway, he got people mad again. He was on a podcast, I think, for Consequence of Sound, and because he was promoting some of his like guitars he was selling and for his company and basses, and obviously Gene Simmons gets people mad a lot because he says rock is dead. He also took a shot at BTS. I'll get to that in a second because that's what people are actually mad about. But he said rock died in 1988, and he uses this arbitrary cutoff of 1988 because he said, oh, well, the Beatles from 1958 to 1988, that was when the Beatles and the Rolling Stones happened, and who was as big as that or whatever. And it's like, man, there's been so many gigantic acts since then, like number one, Nirvana. There's been so many acts: Foo Fighters, Green Day, Fall Out Boy, Panic at the Disco, My Chemical Romance, Weezer, Slipknot, Linkin Park, Disturbed. All these bands that were selling out, either are or were selling out arenas, selling out stadiums. You know, it's a really easy argument to break, especially when you consider that there's actually rock music being played in top 40 radio nowadays with, Machine Gun Kelly's new album that came out. Post Malone plays a decent amount of rock. Youngblood play some rock music here and there. Like, this isn't, it's not what Gene thinks it is. But anyway, the thing that got a lot of people mad was I guess people thought it was supposed to be a shot. And I guess in some way it was at fans of BTS and One Direction and boy bands in general, because he said the fans will move on from that stuff because it's not like the Beatles, or they're not playing instruments and whatever. Basically, he was saying it's not like worthwhile music, and so people weren't going to stay. And he said, "Oh, these girls will move on from that." And one thing I've seen people say about Gene Simmons is that he gets like part of information right, and then just comes to like a really weird conclusion after that. Because one, I think it is safe to say people will move on from, insert boy band here after a certain time period. That's just how music works. It's cyclical. That most music ends up being a fad and for certain year periods. But then you look at other things of who gets popular out of these and why they remain popular. Because a lot of things in pop music especially, and really all music in general, is how can you stay relevant? How is your music going to zig to their zag? Are you going to be able to follow trends? Are you going to be able to stay interesting to people for a long period of time? And one thing you kind of notice with like a lot of these boy bands, if it's even dating back to like the Jackson 5, Michael Jackson got insanely popular, way more popular than the Jackson 5 ever was. He listed NSYNC. Obviously, Justin Timberlake, I think, has surpassed any popularity they ever had, NSYNC ever had. Harry Styles and a couple of those other One Direction dudes are really, really popular right now. I've probably put Harry Styles, his popularity may come close to One Direction if it hasn't exceeded it already. But, he's found a way to stay relevant with his solo career. I guess it's been brought to my attention that people in BTS do have solo careers already. They have solo albums. At some point, those bands disband because it becomes more profitable for a record label to just have them focus on these solo things. That's just kind of how it works. That's the reality of the situation. That's something that probably Gene Simmons meant to say. But, when he said like, oh yeah, these girls are going to move on, blah, 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 blah. I think people took exception to that, even though a lot of these acts, like very specific pop acts, are usually aimed at a very, 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 very young audience. And I feel like that all the ones that he listed were aimed towards those young audiences. So it's whether or not that you can keep them or they move on, because generally, people that are aimed at like the Nickelodeon age range aren't going to like the same thing after like a short periods of time, what I would consider short periods of time. But, there's a reason why certain acts remain popular. There's a reason why Justin Timberlake is still popular after NSYNC had to go away. There's a reason why certain people remain popular. Justin Bieber was never in a boy band, but he's maintained a real surprisingly high status popularity, because I remember at the time people said were expecting kind of the same thing with him, that like, oh, this is gonna be a fad like the Jonas Brothers or whatever. It's gonna fade out. People aren't gonna care about it in like 3 years, and really exceeded that expectation. Sorry, I'm talking over my words. You know, none of this is really music that I particularly like or enjoy or listen to a lot, but you know, the popularity of that is there. Gene Simmons isn't wrong that people are going to move on. I mean, that's just kind of the nature of boy bands, but yeah, people are just mad. I actually ended up having some really interesting positive interactions on Twitter as a result of this, and like tweeting about it, which that was a very weird moment for me, because usually Twitter's like very, very negative, and usually it's like half the time people yelling at me over sports, or specifically like LSU fans and Kansas fans usually tweet at me like in threads or something like that. But you know, that's what it is. Yeah, that's all I got. Really nothing new to add to that conversation, other than, you know, stating the obvious of, hey, Gene, maybe look at the charts every once in a while. You'll see that good old rock music in there. All right, thanks. That's all I got.